Even the MCU's strongest and most charismatic villains have weak spots of their own, through which the heroes wind up gaining the upper hand and saving the day. From Monger to Killmonger, here are the biggest weaknesses of these MCU bad guys. The Marvel Cinematic Universe got its start in 2008 with Iron Man, which introduced the world to Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark and laid the groundwork for the next 10 years of genre-defining superhero movies. As iconic as the first Iron Man film is, however, we wouldn't blame you for forgetting about Obadiah Stane, the vicious opponent who inadvertently pushed Tony to transform from a brilliant but selfish arms dealer into a world-saving, self-sacrificing hero. Stane was an old friend of Howard Stark, Tony's father, and served as CEO of Stark Industries after Howard's death until Tony was able to take over. Despite his fatherly demeanor, Stane coveted Tony's role as the man in charge, and he wound up throwing in his lot with the 10 rings in an effort to get Tony out of the picture and regain control of the company. Stane simply was not content to be Tony's mentor and second in command, especially when Tony's conscience started cutting into Stark Industries' bottom line. He hoped to seize back the company from its idealistic CEO, and he created the Ironmonger suit to help him do just that. Unfortunately for Stane, the greed that motivated him to steal a company was also what led to his ultimate demise. Not only did he pause to gloat rather than finishing Tony off, his rush to build his own Iron Man suit without Tony's brilliance backing it up left him with a powerful but crucially flawed design.
How'd you solve the icing problem?
Icing problem?
Might want to look into it.
That combination of arrogance and greed, along with an unfortunate choice to open up his armor to brag face-to-face, put a quick end to Stane's career as a supervillain. It's no secret that the children of Odin could use quite a bit of family therapy, although each of them seems to struggle with a different issue. The Allfather's youngest son, Loki, wrestles with a godly inferiority complex that pit him against his family and would come to threaten not just the world, but the entire universe. Even before he learned that he was actually the biological son of the frost giant King Laufey, Loki felt like he could never get out of his brother Thor's shadow.
So I am no more than another stolen relic, locked up here until you might have use of me.
Why'd you twist my words?
After learning the truth of his origins, Loki's insecurity kicked into overdrive. He compensated by attempting to get rid of his brother entirely so that he wouldn't have to compete with him anymore, even though Thor himself never saw Loki as anything but a beloved brother. That anger even drove him to drop into the vast emptiness of space rather than accept his brother's mercy after his first defeat. When Loki returned in the Avengers, it was as a puppet of Thanos, throwing in with the universe's most evil villain in an effort to prove himself superior to his brother. Even then, the greatest opponent Loki faced was his own self-doubt. Well, self-doubt and the Hulk. Over and over, he attempted to prove that he was worthy of something he already had, the love and respect of his adopted family. At first, he acted out in unhealthy and harmful ways in an attempt to convince both his relatives and himself that he didn't need anything from them, even though he obviously yearned for their approval. Eventually, as he learned to accept that Thor had always loved him just the way he was able to work productively alongside his brother, instead of feeling threatened by him. Just in time to be taken out by Thanos in front of the brother with whom he'd just made peace. Better late than never. As a literal robot, it's unsurprising that the genocidal Ultron adhered pretty stringently to rules of his own making. However, his inability to compromise or bend his rigid views is what ultimately led to his downfall in Avengers: Age of Ultron. Well, that and the Hulk. These bad guys don't really do so well with him, huh? A product of Tony Stark's peacekeeping program, which was subsequently beefed up by the Mind Stone, Ultron's core objective was to protect the Earth from future threats. Unfortunately for everyone, after mulling over his mission for a while, Ultron determined that the biggest threat to Earth was in fact humans, and he set about attempting to eradicate them. The fixed mindset that sent Ultron on his destructive path was also what caused his end. Even after meeting opposition from the Vision, an artificial being created the same way, Ultron couldn't be reasoned with. If Ultron had been able to change his mind, perhaps the Avengers would have found a way to allow him to exist. As it was, Ultron's single-mindedness paved the way for his complete annihilation, just like all of his robotic creations. Superhero movies might be popular, but they tend to be a hard sell when it comes to critical acknowledgement. Every now and then, though, one manages to break through as an awards contender because it's simply too compelling to ignore. This was the case with Black Panther, and a big part of that film's success was thanks to its villain, Killmonger. Unlike most Marvel movies, which tend to open with the hero's origin story, Black Panther started with Killmonger's, and from the moment we saw him as a child in that opening scene, he was incredibly sympathetic. In fact, as the film progressed, the moviegoers in the audience and even some of the film's good guys had to admit that Killmonger was making a few good points.
These items aren't for sale.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
T'Challa himself conceded that his father, T'Chaka, was wrong about Wakanda's policy of isolation, and that abandoning young Eric had been a mistake. Yet, rather than cultivate the favor of the people already inclined to agree with him, Killmonger wound up pushing them away with his uncompromising extremist views. While adopting a more measured approach could have won him allies within Wakanda, including possibly even T'Challa, Killmonger's plan was to stoke civil uprisings by flooding the world with Wakandan weapons. His all-or-nothing approach to achieving his vision meant that rather than finding an ally in the King of Wakanda, he found an opponent, and the two wound up battling to the death. Loki spent his entire cinematic lifetime struggling to dig out from under a hefty pile of self-doubt and prove his worthiness to his father, his brother, and, most of all, himself. His older sister Hela had the opposite problem in Thor Ragnarok. She was so convinced that she should be ruling over Asgard that she thought all she'd have to do was show up and people would fall in line behind their beloved new queen. Granted, she was a formidable opponent, as evidenced by her ability to take out the Warriors 3 and the armies of Asgard single-handedly. Still, marching through the streets, taking out beloved second-string Marvel characters, and sending all the other Asgardians into hiding doesn't really endear you to the public, no matter how cool your giant wolf is. In other words, she wasn't exactly greeted as a liberator, and her entitlement lulled her into thinking she'd prevail simply because she thought she should.
Believe me, I would love for someone else to rule, but it can't be you. You're just the worst.
Hela's sense of superiority kept her from winning anyone to her cause, with even her right-hand lieutenant abandoning ship when he couldn't stomach any more of her actions. She could have relied on her legitimate claim to the throne to win over the Asgardians, but instead of working with her brothers, she blasted them into oblivion without even checking to make sure they were gone for good, leaving herself wide open for them to team up against her. If she had taken the time to actually interact with the people of Asgard instead of terrorizing them, or if she'd collaborated with her brothers instead of opposing them, it may have led to an Asgard that all three of Odin's children could have lived in together, instead of one that had to be raised into nothing. Carol Danvers faces a variety of opponents in Captain Marvel, but Yon-Rogg is by far the most insidious. He spends most of the film pretending to be her mentor and ally, but even when he's being set up as Carol's friend, there are hints of darkness lying beneath his friendly surface. Multiple times he attempts to diminish her power under the guise of training her, accusing her of being too emotional. He pushes her to hold back rather than develop her strength and discourages her from exploring the limits of her powers. He claims this is for her own good, to teach her control, but it's really designed to keep her weak so that he can hold the power in the relationship. Gradually, as Carol uncovers the truth of who she is, she begins to realize that Yon-Rogg's training was never meant to help her. Instead, he was giving her a pair of metaphorical handcuffs, holding her back so that the Kree can use her for their own purposes. Carol stepping into her own power feels like a threat to Yon-Rogg, who wishes to keep her small so that he can feel big, important, and powerful. He even goes so far as trying to win her over with the approval he's been holding back once she realizes the truth. Strip away the superpowers, and it's a story all too familiar for many women who've been abused by insecure men. Yon-Rogg's weakness doesn't have anything to do with his physical capabilities, but everything to do with how threatened he feels by a strong woman. It's an attitude that leads him to getting blasted into a rock because once Carol figures out what he's doing, she has no tolerance for it anymore. There isn't a single Marvel villain who doesn't have some degree of hubris in their character, but no one displays this trait more than Thanos, whose plan to eliminate half of all life in the universe culminates in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Thanos is convinced that what he's doing isn't just right, but necessary, and that it's up to him to set things on a path that only he's allowed to determine no matter the cost. Granted, Thanos is incredibly powerful, and he actually does succeed despite his arrogance. But in viewing himself and his plan as inevitable, Thanos doesn't ever consider that there may be value in individual lives, teamwork, and self-sacrifice. He views the Avengers as pests to be swatted down rather than serious threats, and it never occurs to him that someone could be willing to sacrifice everything to preserve the lives Thanos wants to take. The Avengers fight their battle knowing the odds are against them, which makes them willing to do whatever they have to in order to earn their victory. They're willing to sacrifice themselves, while Thanos is only willing to sacrifice others. The Mad Titan never even considers that he might lose, which cracks open the door for exactly that to happen. For the first act of Spider-Man Far From Home, Quentin Beck seems like a pretty good guy. He's funny, he's charming, and he seems like exactly the sort of smart and nurturing mentor figure Peter Parker is looking for. Unfortunately, he's also a con man, nursing a serious grudge against his former employer, Tony Stark, and he's decided that the whole world has to pay for the wrong that was done to him. To be fair, Tony Stark was probably a pretty terrible boss to work for, and absolutely underestimated the technology Beck and his crew used throughout the film. Beck has every right to be mad, but the lengths he goes to in drawing together a group of similarly wronged ex-employees and hatching a plan to destroy entire cities in order to usurp Tony's legacy, that goes a little beyond leaving him a bad review on Glassdoor. This bitterness pushes Mysterio to keep going way past the time when he should have stopped. It leads him to keep attacking Peter with his drones even after they start malfunctioning, which ultimately leads to his death. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite MCU characters are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.